Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Sven and I hope you're doing great. So in the last video we looked at the order of operations inside the entire software of DaVinci Resolve. Let's focus a little bit on the processing inside the color page. So the first thing that is going to happen is the group pre-clip. So if you're working with a group, and let's just assume that's the case, you can switch between the group pre-clip, the clip grading, and the group post-clip grading. The pre-clip is the first thing that is going to happen. It's going to affect all the clips within this group, but it's the first thing that's going to happen. So if we are applying something like just an offset like this is what happens before. If you remember, we had this graph over here. It's before the OpenFX inside the edit page. It doesn't make a huge difference, but it does make a difference. So after that, we do have the clip grading, which is the grading specifically on each clip. And this is completely dependent on how you set up your node tree and how you like to work. But after that clip grading, we go into the group post clip, which is, again, because it's a group grading, it will affect all the clips that are inside this group. And if you want to have more information about group grading and how you can use them, I do have another video about that. And after the group post clip, we do have the timeline grading, which is affecting the entire timeline. It will affect everything that we had in our timeline before. It will affect all the compositing we did. It will affect all the titles that we had in our timeline, because this is the last step before we go into the post processing. So now let's talk about the node order in the color page. The way you have to read the color page is you go from left to right and you go from top to bottom. The first thing that we are going to do will affect all the nodes after that. For example, we tint the image blue, then we can see that all the nodes after that have been tinted blue as well. But if we reset that, and if we go to the third node, for example, and we tint this one, let's choose a different color, we can see that all the nodes after that have been affected, but the nodes before have not been affected. So the pipeline goes from left to right. But what do I mean by top to bottom? So if we are looking at layer nodes, for example, and you can create those by hitting Alt or Option and L. Now we have two nodes on top of each other. And you might think from other software that if you select the top layer and you change something, that it will actually be the thing that you will see. However, you can see that's not true in Resolve, because the top layer inside the node graph is actually the bottom layer in the color processing. So if you go to the other layer node and we change something here, you can see that we are actually affecting the image. And now if we limit this grading operation to a certain part of the image by using a matte, for example with the circular window, we can see that this is basically sitting on top of the other node. And if we move the image of this underlying node, you can see that this is actually two different images applied on top of each other. It's not just the grading operation, the tint green yellow that's sitting here, it's actually the entire image sitting here. So if we move this one somewhere else, we can see that this layer is actually staying here. And if we add another layer and we make a window somewhere else and we tint everything in a different color, you can see that this is sitting on top of the other layer as well. And if we look at parallel nodes, you can see that now the images are actually combined. We get the green yellow tint from this node and we get the red tint from this one. So the area where they overlap, you can actually see that it's a mixture of both. And also if we move the image to somewhere else, you can see that parallel nodes are actually just the adjustment, make it green or make it red, and not the entire image placed on top of that. And now let's go one level deeper and look at the order of operations inside of a node. The first thing that happens if you're looking at the color page is the camera raw, but we actually talked about that earlier when we talked about the processing on the entire software. The camera raw was the first thing that happened, but you can still access all the controls for that in the color page. And for that, we are going to look at another graphic inside of the user manual. So we have the camera raw, then we have all our motion effects, which is motion blur, noise reduction, which is over here. It's temporal and spatial noise reduction and the motion blur. Then we get the Resolve FX and OpenFX, which is all the stuff that you can find over here under effects. So if I apply a Gaussian blur right now, this is the second step that happened. Then we have the advanced auto color and advanced shot match, but I don't know anybody who uses them anyway. Then we have the chart color match, which you can find over here. Then you have the stereo color match, which is important for working with 3D films where you have the 3D glasses, because you have one image for the left eye and one image for the right eye. Those can be slightly different in color, so this is where the stereo color match comes in. Then you have the shot match, the legacy version for that. Then we have the shadow and highlight recovery, as well as the midtone detail. Those can be found in the color wheels. They are located over here. You have shadow and you have highlight. Then we have the color boost and temperature and tint, which can be found over here. We have the color boost and the temp for warm or cool, and the tint for magenta or green. And after that you have the HDR palette, then you have the lift gamma gain, and then contrast and pivot. And after contrast and pivot we go to the custom curves, which can be found here. And it's only the first one of those, so it's not the hue curves, which are all of the ones that you can find here. It's just the custom curves. Then we go back to the log controls, which can be found under the color wheels and log wheels. And there we have shadow, midtone and highlights. And then we have the hue and saturation. Those are the hue and saturation that you will find in the color wheels. So in primary or log, it's the same thing. We have the saturation and we have the hue. And then there is the 1D or 3D LUT. And after the LUT, we have the HSL curves and the color warper, which is quite important because they do respond a lot differently after a LUT or before a LUT. So it's quite important to know that difference as well. And then almost at the very end, we have the channel mix, which is the RGB mixer, and it can be found over here. And this one I find also really important to know that it's at the end of the LUT, because all the adjustments that you do before that, so let's say you have a really strong look, for example, like a 2-strip look where 2 of your channels are getting the same signal. And we can see that in the vector scope that we don't have any information in the blues anymore. We only go red, cyan. Now all the stuff that we do in this node, let's say we go to green, we will not get any green from that. We will just get red or cyan. We don't get any yellow, we don't get green, we don't get magenta, because all of that is happening before the channel mixer. So if we wanted to create some yellow in that image, we would need a node after that. And then we can move it to the yellow side again. And then after the RGB mixer, we have the soft clip, which can be found underneath the custom curves in this area down here. As a last step, we have the defocus, and by that they mean the blur section. This is the last thing basically that's happening in a node. So I guess you can see, especially from the example with the RGB mixer, that the order of operations really makes a difference on what you can do with the image and what you cannot do with the image. So you may ask, why do I need multiple nodes? So the first thing is, yeah, as we saw, certain things, especially like heavy effects with the RGB mixer or the curves, will affect what you can do with a tool that is happening before that. So you are more flexible if you have a node tree that consists of more nodes. And it's also more easy to toggle on and off those changes that you make. For example, we have a node tree that looks like this. So what we have going on is a little bit of color adjustments, we have some power windows, we have a little bit more of color adjustments, and at the very end we have a color space transform that brings us to our display color space. First of all, you're more flexible as to what you want to do, we talked about that, but it's also easier to toggle on and off individual changes. So for example, the director wants this entire image to be a little bit more yellow, let's say. So we can just push a little bit more yellow into the scene. And now he wants to know the before and after. So now, because it was created in an empty node, we can just toggle on and off this node by hitting Ctrl or Command D, or just clicking on the number underneath this node. It's really easy to have this one adjustment visible just by enabling one node on and off. However, if we did all of that in the same node, so for example, we have one node that's doing a little bit of temperature adjustment and contrast over here. If the director wants this image to be a little bit more yellow, but we do it in the same node, and now he wants to see a before and after, if we disable and enable this node, you can see that we are altering way too much. We are also disabling and enabling the contrast and the temperature adjustment that we did earlier. So having this being done in a separate node gives us the flexibility to just review this change that we did. And also it's great for organizing. So for example, in this setup, I did all the light shaping that I did, which is a vignette over here and a little bit of brightening the faces over here. I can organize them into this stack and know exactly this is where I shaped the light, this is where I changed the temperature and the contrast, this is where I applied a subtle look, and this is where I applied the color space transform. So why are we working with nodes in the first place? Because other tools like Photoshop, for example, work with layers, or After Effects works with layers. And if you ever worked with After Effects and you wanted to take the alpha from one layer and pipe it into another layer, it can get quite complicated and quite unorganized to actually know what's going on. While in Resolve, you can just create an alpha, like for example, I have an alpha from this matte and I can just use the same alpha in a different node that I create somewhere else by just piping the alpha from the first node to the second one. Now both nodes use the same alpha created by this ramp, and as you can see, when I tint the second node in this magenta color and I move the alpha in the first node, the effect of the second node moves along at the same time. And this is just a great benefit of working with nodes. So this is the exact order of operations in DaVinci Resolve, and as I said in the last video, there's a lot of things that can be confused and can be mixed up, and I find it quite important to understand exactly what's going on. So if you're new here, please consider subscribing to the channel to not miss on upcoming episodes. And also please let me know if you enjoyed this type of content and if you have any topics you want me to talk about. So that's it for today. See you in the next video.